Now, let's break down the news shaping our world. A Toronto hospital finds ways to radically speed up surgeries. But first, the deadly salmonella outbreak, raising concerns about food safety. Let's break it down. A salmonella outbreak linked to cantaloupe kills several Canadians and sickens over 100 more.
Is really the tip of the iceberg. There are probably many, many, many more cases.
Kids and seniors now the majority of those being treated.
People are scared. They don't want to get sick.
Salmonella bacteria is also contagious. It has no taste or smell, so you'd never know. So what should you do to keep you and your family safe? Keith Warner has the answers. He's a professor at the Department of Food Science at the University of Guelph. And Keith, salmonella typically is associated with animal or human feces. How do you think these cantaloupes might have gotten contaminated?
Well, certainly back 20 years ago, we used to have an outbreak of salmonella and cantaloupes nearly every year. And back then, the kind of scenario was that the field used to grow the cantaloupes got contaminated with salmonella, be it animal intrusion, be it the compost that they put on the ground. Like some growers even put raw manure on the ground. And because cantaloupes grow on the ground, they're in close contact, and cantaloupes especially because of the sort of netting surface, they kind of accumulate this dirt with the salmonella, and salmonella is so good at surviving in the environment that when they're harvested, they go to the processing plant. They're kind of washed briefly to obviously get rid of the soil, but what that does is just spread the salmonella to other cantaloupes. Then we get them and we cut through the cantaloupe, taking the salmonella from the surface into the sort of flesh, which is a very good medium for growing salmonella. And that's the classic way it happened. And I would imagine that's the classic way it happened this time around.
So the warning here is associated with both pre-cut and whole cantaloupes. When we're out shopping, whether it's for cantaloupes or other fruit, what advice do you have for us?
Well, certainly when you're buying pre-cut, you're always going to take a risk. Even before this outbreak, pre-cut is where they're kind of cutting through the fruit and there might be cross-contamination with other fruit. And the thing is, you don't know where the fruit's been. Yeah, basically what they use the melons for in that cut is usually melons that are nearly towards the end of their best before date. So you always want, if you can, I know it's convenient to have pre-cut, but the best option is to actually use whole lemons. And there's two reasons for that. One is that obviously they haven't been cut yet, so they haven't, the salmonella, if it's there, hasn't been introduced into the flesh and they haven't been held for a certain amount of time. But the other thing, you look for the country of origin. In this case, for example, they're really just persuading people not to consume cantaloupes from Mexico, where they think they originated from. Most of those should be off the shelf now, but when it comes to pre-cut, there's no label at all to tell you where it is. So definitely whole is a good option for a lot of fresh produce, not just melons in this case.
And if I bring those melons home that are whole, not pre-cut, and is there a way that I can, I don't know, wash them and cut them at home that brings the risk down to zero?
I wish there was. You know, I hear the sort of suggestion that you can put them in the sink, get some washing up liquid, give them a good scrub. But the reality is that they're very hard to remove. And certainly I wouldn't risk, if I thought the melon or cantaloupe was contaminated, it was from contaminated batch, I wouldn't even try to wash it for the simple reason washing doesn't do anything. So you have to be cautious. And the trouble with fresh produce at the best of times is what happens in the field or the processing plant lands on our plate, regardless of what we do. And that's the same for a lot of fresh produce. Now, there is obviously virtual washing cantaloupes and for pesticide residues, but even then it's not that effective.
We've all heard of Craigslist. Well, now we want to hear Keith's list. We asked you to identify kind of 5 food items, the top 5 that might surprise us that are susceptible to salmonella.
Well, you know, certainly we know about the meat and the eggs, but salmonella gets around a lot of places. If I had to just focus on fresh produce, then certainly cantaloupe is up there. Mango, you know, again, this sort of low acid fruit. tomatoes that have had a good sort of run, because back 20 years ago we used to have an outbreak every year. There's actually an outbreak going on in Italy with salmonella on tomatoes. And then you get into things like sprouted seeds, which have always been notoriously associated with it, and even honeydew melons. I think the only one I can recall that hasn't been implicated is the watermelon, due to its smooth surface. So if I had to have a 5 list of fresh produce, they would be the 5.
So, Keith, you were saying at one point there were lots of salmonella outbreaks with cantaloupe, fewer now. Why is that?
So what we basically have is good practices on the farm. Don't put raw manure on the field. Make sure it's composted. So that's one aspect. The industry tidying up its act. The other aspect, though, is our diagnostics have got much more sensitive. But even in this case, with all the fingerprinting and sequencing, it took them about a month to detect the outbreak. So it can look like it's coming back and we're going to have another cantaloupe outbreak. But essentially, the industry has got better, but obviously not perfect.
One last quick question. If you invite me over for dinner sometime, any chance you'll serve cantaloupe?
I haven't served cantaloupe for the last 15 years, so I think the chances are good that it won't be there.
All right, Keith, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Keith Warner, a professor at the Department of Food Science at the University of Guelph. Just ahead, hyper-throughput surgeries. Never heard of them? Well, that may soon change.
I woke up in the recovery and they told me what time it was. I was amazed.
How it could be the answer to cutting wait times for a hip replacement.
Yep. 1, 2, 3.
Hip replacement wait times only seem to be growing.
Everyone's saying the same thing, like we have to do better.
A new Toronto hospital experiment shows great promise in speeding things up.
I was actually blown away how fast. I was amazed.
Quicker, more efficient, but is it safe? For doctors and nurses at Toronto's Humber River Hospital, the goal is to reduce the entire process from hours to minutes with new tools and prep techniques allowing far more surgeries per day. Christine Birak breaks down how it works.
Change is not easy, especially in medicine. However,
If you listen to Canadians, be it physicians or patients over the last several years, everyone's saying the same thing, like we have to do better, we have to change what we're doing.
on this morning, a team at Humber River Hospital in Toronto wants to show change is possible. It can be done safely, and more Canadians can get surgeries they need.
We've done 2 surgeries so far. We start about 10 to 8. Every 30 to 35 minutes, we're sort of able to flip rooms.
Dr. Sebastian Rodriguez is an orthopedic surgeon specializing in hips and knees. His goal is to fix 14 hips in 8 hours.
Okay, see you in a bit. Breathe now.
On a typical day, one of these operating rooms sees between 4 and 5 patients, with one surgeon operating on all of them. What they're trying here today is 14 surgeries, with one surgeon moving between 2 rooms. The model is called hyper-throughput surgeries. They've done this only once before and managed 12 surgeries. One of the patients today is Richard White. Once an avid hiker and skier, White now struggles to put his own shoes on. For most hip replacements, Dr. Rodriguez makes an incision over the hip, removes any diseased or damaged bone and cartilage, then implants a replacement cup and hip socket. And that's the sound of a metal stem being inserted into the top of the thigh bone, which is topped with a replacement ball. How are you feeling?
Pretty good, actually. Yeah, surprisingly good.
The team built White a new artificial joint in about 35 minutes.
That was really fast. When I woke up in the recovery and they told me what time it was, I was amazed. I thought it would definitely be a lot longer.
So how does all that happen so quickly without compromising safety?
We did so much planning.
Mylene Vidal is a highly trained operating room nurse.
The first thing that we actually did was like instrumentations. We actually just built a tray according to what they need for the case.
A tray holds surgical tools, usually more than what's needed. Each one takes time to unwrap and prep. Smaller custom trays help cut setup times here from 30 minutes per surgery down to about 11.
I'm about to go because I'm prepared for the next one.
That's one time-saving change.
The efficient direct anterior approach.
Humber's surgical team learned other lessons from a public hospital in Belgium and a for-profit center in the U.S. By mid-afternoon, they're closing in on their goal.
We're on number 9, I believe.
To get there, they're streamlining patients to seamlessly move in and out of operating rooms. Tech-wise, the surgeon's using a measuring tool that guides placement of the implant in real time. And well-timed housekeeping teams move in as soon as each procedure is done. Just some of the small but innovative changes in the entire process.
The cumulative effect of all those minutes then allows us to add additional procedures in the day.
John V. Solanke is a nurse turned VP of Clinical Services at Humber River. As things stand, Ontario only pays hospitals to do a specific number of surgeries per year. Beyond their cap, Humber relies on fundraising dollars to do more surgeries.
We should be rewarding institutions that can actually optimize and innovate. We keep funding things like private clinics, and we keep sort of diverting the healthcare dollar.
She says the hyper-throughput model in hospitals is the type of innovation provinces should be investing in.
One of our philosophies at Humber has been, if it can be done in a private clinic, why can't it be done here?
Around 4 p.m., Dr. Rodriguez and his team wrap up their 14th patient.
It can be tiresome. It can seem a bit chaotic, but it's all like an organized dance. So yeah, I mean, I feel good because, we're able to help 14 people today. They're all going to go home within the same day.
They've been absolutely amazing.
Like White, patients all went home within hours of their life-changing surgery.
They say I'll be up and walking within a few days.
While some argue hyper-throughput models are tough to replicate, others insist it's time for a cultural shift in hospitals, one that will open new doors to new possibilities.
So, Christine, 14 surgeries a day seems extremely demanding. Can the doctors handle it?
It is demanding, and towards the end of the day, I asked Dr. Rodriguez how he felt. He said it's tiring, but they're all well trained. They were prepared for this. It's different, but it's doable. I also asked him how often he would do something like this. He said probably 2 days a week, and other surgeons could do it on the other days, and it doesn't have to be 14. And going forward, Humber is planning to do 20 more of these hyper-throughput days and then take stock of what's working and what can be done better in March, but so far, so good.
And so far, the hospital is interested in using this model beyond hip surgeries. What about expanding it beyond Toronto? Is there interest in other places in the country?
Absolutely. Humber says other hospitals are asking how they can do this and even expand it to other areas. Now, I don't think this is something that can easily be done. Systems run the way they do, often for a reason. That said, you could really feel the excitement from the staff who were there that day. They don't like seeing people suffering as they wait for these surgeries. So we're in a moment when Canadians want to see change. If hospitals have operating rooms and staff that are open to doing this, it could make a real difference. But provinces need to adjust and fund and encourage this type of innovation.
Christine Burak, always great having you on the show. Thanks.
You're welcome.
And coming soon on The National, as war rages in the Middle East, we explore how a peace process begins. Idea's host Nala Ayed speaks to a noted conflict mediator and 2 former leaders who found peace in the long conflicts in Colombia and Northern Ireland.
We wanted to speak about where a peace process begins.
The first step is often an idea. It's when, the cost of war becomes too heavy.
Feel mostly numb and sickened, and I think it's also very important that those who are involved in building peace dig deep and continue.
What was it that motivated people to actually think, yes, I want to sit down and start talking?
Well, as Nelson Mandela said, you make peace with your enemy, not with your friends.
But how does it begin? Did you pick up the phone and call?
So we started in a process of building trust. For example, I sent my brother as my personal envoy. They could have kidnapped him, they could have killed him, but they interpreted that as a real show of trust. There is no total truth, and there is no perfect justice, and there's no perfect peace agreement.
Coming up, you better watch out. An army of Santas has already come to town.
There's at least 127 so far.
The Nova Scotia neighborhood with giant Christmas spirit is next in our moment. Coming up this Sunday on The National, our feature interview with one of the best breakdancers in the world, Canada's Phil Wizard. We talk about his hopes for the 2024 Paris Olympics. But tonight, let's see how quick he is on his feet.
I have 8 questions, 2 minutes. You're used to pressure. Are you all set?
Yes.
Okay, here's the first question. Do I call you Phil Kim, Phil Wizard, or Mr. Wizard? Which would you prefer?
Phil Wizard is kind of the one I go by.
I'm glad you did not say Mr. Wizard. You travel a lot internationally, so if a border guard says to you, what do you do for a living? What's the answer?
It is dancer. Yeah, I think oftentimes if I try to say athlete, they'll be like, what do you do? I'm a breaker, and then they'll go, well, that's not really a sport, and then I have to get into that, so I just say I'm a dancer.
And any awkward interactions when you say that to them? I guess dancer kind of makes sense, right?
Yeah,
So
dancer makes sense, not super
out.
awkward, they kind of figure it out, but sometimes there's questions.
Yes to pineapple on pizza or no?
I will not answer this question. Too controversial.
Is breaking a sport or an art?
For me, it's an art, but I think it's both. I think the beautiful thing about breaking, it can kind of transcend labels. So to me, it doesn't really matter what you call it.
You're a role model, right? So if there's a young person watching who's saying, I want to follow my passion, I want to quit school, what would Phil say to that?
I would say follow your passion. I mean, honestly, I think it's bad, but I think follow your passion. I quit school to do what I did, but just remember that there's risk to that as well. But if you truly love what you do, if you feel that you're good at it, you have the ability to do it, I think go for it.
And if their parents called you and said, what the heck are you doing telling my kid to quit school, what would you say to the parents?
I would say you can talk to my parents.
What's the name of your favorite move right now?
The name of my favorite move right now is swimming. It's a move that I invented by watching swimmers, and that's the most fun one for me to do.
Just keep swimming, just keep swimming, swimming, swimming.
Is there any move in breaking that you, like, take a look at me, be kind, but be honest, any move you think you could teach me right now?
100%. I think the basics anyone can learn. I've taught like an 80-year-old man in Japan once some of the basics, so I think anyone can do it.
Last question, breaking does not belong in the Olympics. What do you say to that?
I say just wait and see, watch it, and I think people will change their mind.
All right. Well, we'll have to check with the judges and see how you did, but I think you did pretty well.
All right, we're pretty familiar with this guy, a big old inflatable Santa, but when there is a bunch of them on one street, it's a sight to behold. And one Nova Scotia neighborhood has done just that, duplicating a video they saw online and accepting donations for those in need. Their version of Santa Claus Lane is our moment.
There's a reel on Instagram that we saw of the Santas in Toronto for Kringlewood, and I loved it. And I just said, come on, neighbors. Everybody was like, yes. Like, immediately, yes, let's do it. There's at least 127 so far. This is Christmas spirit. This is getting everyone together. The kids love it.
When you saw all the Santas, did you get a smile on your face? We're collecting money for the people who are living in tents and for people who are having a hard time with food.
We have the QR code that people can scan with their phones to donate directly to Feed Nova Scotia. I think we're right around the $6,000 mark so far. I hope we can get over 10,000.
To see everybody coming down the street with smiles on their faces, and then the bonus of giving back to Feed Nova Scotia, it's what the season's all about.
Merry Christmas, everyone!
So, you know what? This is one of those moments, and it happens every once in a while. When I hear about them in the morning, I think, you know, is it going to work? Is it going to be cheesy? Not cheesy at all. That's fantastic. It must be so cool to drive through that neighborhood. Those Santas are 12 feet tall, and as of tonight, I think the neighborhood has raised $9,600 for charity. You can watch us anytime, anywhere on the free CBC News app and subscribe to the National's YouTube channel. I'm Ian Hanomansing. I hope you join me Sunday afternoon for Cross Country Checkup on CBC Radio and News Network, and back here Sunday evening with the National. Good night.